So now I'm going to hand things over to our presenters today. We have Ann Biechner and Kendra Julius joining us. They are CQL Quality Enhancement Specialists, and they're going to get us started with this presentation. Kendra, Ann, hand things over to you.
Thank you, Seth. Hello and welcome to CQL's webinar on the personal outcome measures, interview strategies for children, young people, and families. Kendra, Julius, and I, Ann, will be facilitating this with you today. In this webinar, we'll be providing you an introduction to the personal outcome measures for children and youth. We'll share some highlights as to what makes the personal outcome measures for children and youth unique. And today's webinar will include a few key differences between the adult and the children and youth personal outcome measure applications, the key components to successful interview structures, some additional special considerations as applied to the children and youth application, how to establish some successful interview scenarios, and we'll also provide a brief scenario and overview of the key issues for some of the 21 personal outcome measures for children and youth. From time to time, you may hear us, Kendra and I, interchange the acronym of POM or POM for the personal outcome measures. A little bit about CQL and who we are. We have a long history of being on the cutting edge in our field of human services. CQL's vision is a world of dignity, opportunity, and community for all people. Please note that this includes all people. CQL believes that everyone deserves dignity, opportunity, and community inclusion, whether they have a disability or not. What is available and right for one community member should be available to everyone. I do want to talk to you a little bit about the personal outcome measures manuals and some of the tools. The personal outcome measures for children and youth manual is available on our website and can be downloaded for free. The manual will apply to children and teens between the ages of 5 years until the age of majority in the country or province, and we would use the personal outcome measures for children and youth on or after the teen's 18th or 19th birthday, depending again on the country, province, or location where you are. We would use the adult manual for personal outcome measures. For children under 5 and their families, there's additional guidance that we have available to apply to the personal outcome measures manual for children and youth for early intervention. And certainly feel free to reach out to Kendra or myself for that, for any additional information. A little background on the personal outcome measures is that the personal outcome measures are based on field tests that were conducted in Canada and the United States. It's been reevaluated several times and remains a reliable tool. It's also now an approved tool of quality measures, allowable and approved by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS. For both adults and for the children and youth application, the personal outcome measures are a wonderful way to measure personal quality of life, the responsiveness of services and supports, and the quality of those services and supports to help people, adults and or children and their families, live the lives of their choosing. Personal outcome measures focuses on choices that people have in their lives, and personal choice and personal control is one of the main personal quality of life matters that is a concept that drives all of our work within CQL. All of these tenets apply to both the application for adults and as well to the personal outcome measures for children and youth, which we're going to be diving in a little bit more to today. For those of you who may be familiar with the personal outcome measures manual for adults, the children and youth manual is organized just like the adult manual, that it includes a narrative section for each outcome. It includes information gathering with guiding question sections, and then the decision-making criteria. So they both follow the same. Also, similarities to the adult manual are very similar to what we see listed here on this slide. Some of the similarities between the two applications are listed here. For adults and for children and youth and their families, outcomes are defined by the child, youth, and their family for 11 of the outcomes. Individualized supports facilitate the attainment of specific outcomes, and it's highly unlikely that people, children, and their families will attain all 21 outcomes at the same time. As with adults, it's crucial to spend time with the child, youth, and family to determine their preferences and their definitions on each outcome. As part of any personal outcome measures conversation, information is collected from the person, from the adult, from the child, youth, and the family's perspective on each of the 21 personal outcome measures. Key to gathering information is using the personal outcome measures manuals. And for this webinar, we're talking about the Children and Youth Manual that provides guidance and decision-making determination criteria. Again, and it's not typical to expect that all 21 outcomes are going to be present at all times in people's lives. The CQL has a wonderful database of national data that we've collected for many, many years. The data that you see here on this screen, the outcomes correlation data, represents data that's been collected for children and youth outcomes between the years of 2016 and 2024 and is applicable to 554 data sets. An additional note that needs to be made about this chart that's on the screen is that the data is somewhat skewed to the population of children who are 5 and under, because most of this data has been received from our early intervention work and collaboration with the state of Tennessee. To give you a little explanation of this, this table shows which of the personal outcome measures have the strongest correlative power to achieving the higher number of total outcomes. So CQL asked, which outcomes best predict achieving lots of different outcomes? The regression analysis revealed these outcomes to have the greatest degree of predicting many more outcomes, which are listed on the top part of the screen. As indicated, children achieving the outcome of children and youth live in integrated environments have the highest probability of achieving more outcomes. In comparison, the outcome children have the best possible health correlates to total achieved outcomes with lower power than any other. However, this does not at all mean that having best possible health does not matter, but instead indicates that it is not mutually exclusive to the group achieving higher outcomes. Next, we want to talk to you a little bit about the differences between the adult application and the children and youth and families application. You'll be able to see on this slide that there are several of the outcomes that have been highlighted in yellow. Those are specific to children, youth, and their families. Those that are not highlighted in yellow are particular to children, youth themselves. So the ones that are listed on this slide, numbers 4, 5, 6, 7, 12, and 15, include children, youth, and their families experience continuity and security. Children, youth, and their families exercise rights. Children, youth, and their families are treated fairly. Children, youth, and their families are respected. The same for children, youth, and their families are connected to natural support networks, and that children, youth, and their families decide when to share personal information. The following 5 on this last chart also describe which are these outcomes which pertain both to children and their families. So children and their families choose where and with whom they live. Children and families choose developmental, academic, and vocational priorities. They choose services. Children and families choose personal goals, and children and families realize personal goals. As we move through the course of this webinar, Kendra and I will be taking a little bit more time to explain to you what some of those additional information points that we would want to gather as it pertains to the outcome for children and their families. Kendra?
Thanks, Anne. So we told you guys that we're going to get into kind of the nitty gritty. So let's start with the interview structure for children and youth. Okay. So there are many additional considerations for children and youth that may not come up with adults, especially older adults, right? And so those many differences are based on children's age and development, their family situation, their family dynamics, and expectations for ongoing transitions. We have a lot of change that happens in a child's life, right? Just as part of growing up, right? School issues that don't necessarily happen for children receiving services are also part of this to consider as well. So in order to use this tool accurately, it's very important to set up the interview in a way that facilitates participation from both the family, if possible, sometimes that may not be possible, and the child, and to gather a follow-up information from someone who knows the child and the family and their supports very well. And that person doesn't have to be paid. So if you're familiar with the adult personal outcome measures interview structure, the children and youth POM follows really the same kind of structure with the addition of additional people during that initial interview and that initial conversation. So like always, we start by having a conversation with the family and the child. So depending on the child's age, the family may be doing most of the speaking, but they might not be really present or speaking at all if the child's older. For children, it's very important that you lay eyes on the child and that you involve them in the conversation as much as you possibly can. For some families, it's not possible for the family to be involved due to court orders or other situations. And in that instance, we recommend talking with the child and the person who is serving that familial role. So that might be a foster family, that might be something like that, or a supporter that, like you would for an adult that needs or wants support during a POM interview. And again, that's not for all children, that's more for the younger children. Older children and teens may not need someone to support them during that part of the interview. So with this, you really want to ask questions of the child and ask that supporter if they know about the child's family's desires for those outcomes that matter for the family. Okay. And follow up should be done with a supporter, again, paid or unpaid, that knows the person, the child, and the family very well. If you need to do a record review, you really do that just like you would with an adult. You get the consent from the family and the child. And you only do that in a situation where you need more information and no one can tell you that information, right? Or you need to clarify something about rights. Sometimes that's a situation where you may need to do a record review. Decision making needs to take place just like it does with the adult interview, right? So you're always referring back to the manual decision making matrix for each outcome, and you're involving those additional considerations. Sometimes those are different for children and youth because it depends on the age of the child, it depends on their support needs, it depends on their family situation. So referring back to those can be very helpful. So when we're interviewing family members and the child may or may not be present, it's still very important that we are preparing to be able to accommodate everyone's needs, okay? So you want to ensure that the space has opportunity for younger children to play nearby. That might be the child that you're interviewing. It may be the child's family members, such as other siblings, right? You want to ensure that the facilities are there to accommodate the family and the child's needs. So bathrooms that are accessible if that's something that's needed, toys, gates, childproofing for those young children, especially making sure that families feel safe and comfortable in that space, right? To be able to, let their children play safely and talk to you at the same time. I suggest trying to do the interview in the child's home or typically frequented areas like daycare or something like that, if at all possible. Sometimes that's not, and that's okay too. You want to know ahead of time and make sure the family knows ahead of time. So the interview typically takes an hour and a half, maybe longer, maybe less, it just depends. And it's good to bring things that will help occupy the child and their siblings. And be mindful of people's schedules. It's really hard with families sometimes to set up these interviews because they have so many things going on, right? So communication before is key, checking in and making sure that those schedules will work and that they have time to get to their next activities and things like that. Also be really flexible with timing due to this. You may need to do the interview over someone's lunch hour. You may need to do the interview at supper time, things like that. Just do whatever the family needs, much like you do with adults, but I think it's even more important with children. Like we do with adults, you always want to explain the purpose of the interview and thank the child and thank the family for being there. Be sure that the family member knows that you're focusing on the child, not necessarily that family member, right? But you will need the family's help to answer some of the questions during the interview, and that some of those outcomes do involve the family's perspective. Really explaining that ahead of time is key. And one of the things you may also want to consider is asking the child if it's okay to get mom's and dad's help when they can't answer a question, especially for younger children or children that need support to answer. That's a really good best practice there. During the interview, just like we do for adults, you want to offer ample breaks. You want to be prepared for a moving interview. You may be sitting on the floor with the child if you're able to do that, and that's their preference. You may be talking with them, playing with toys, or drawing with them. I played a game of Risk once while doing an interview. Just really depends on what the child and family needs. Okay. You want to ask the family and older children or teens, right, if they are comfortable having that older child or teen have some privacy, discuss some topics such as abuse, intimacy, relationships. Not all teens will want to do that because you may be a stranger to them, and that's okay. And not all families will be comfortable with that. So that'll be something to discuss ahead of time and during the interview, and really support that family where they're at with that. Just like we do with adults, you want to watch for signs that the child is getting bored and needs to do something, right? So you can play, you can change subjects, you can offer breaks, you can offer food if that's cool with the family, or support for the child to go do something else, right? Play nearby, things like that. If the child or young person wants to leave, you need to ask their permission to continue to talk to their family members, in their absence. Like we do with every interview, it's really important to keep judgment out of your words and tones. Families are very sometimes sensitive, right, to the way that they're parenting their children because that's very, very personal. And so it's just up to us to really, truly understand without conveying any kind of judgment or thoughts about how people are doing things. We want to be ready to listen. Most families have a really big story to tell. So one of the other things I would recommend you guys do is make a quick list of questions or ideas for kind of conversation starters to get you some information. So some ideas that Ann and I came up with is, what's your favorite video game? What's your favorite cartoon? You could take a trip anywhere. Where would you go? Do you have a favorite stuffed animal or toy? Maybe bring your own if you know you're interviewing with a small child, right? So you guys can play with your stuffies together. What's your favorite song or artist right now? You can play tic-tac-toe, I Spy with My Little Eye. All kinds of things like that can really lend a lot of richness and enjoyment to the interview process for the child. All right, Anne.
Thanks, Kendra. Personal outcome measures, we want to talk with you a little bit about some of the additional considerations for children and youth to help make this successful, and things that you as potentially information gatherers or part of the support team need to be mindful of. And these include age, family involvement, court intervention, and transitions, which we hope are happening pretty regularly for children, but there are a lot of things to be planning for. We're going to discuss these each a little bit more in detail in the next slides. Control over decision making, we really do want to talk about how that plays out with age. Certainly we understand that depending on what the age is of the child, there's going to be different decision making authority that children have or input. We do want to, through the course of the childhood, is introduce to children to have an opportunity to learn about, to have education, to have experience and exposure. And childhood is a prime time for learning about what options and experiences are out there. This will only help teens and young adults to be in a better position to later make informed decisions. When a child or youth is young, they certainly will need adults to be making decisions for them. They know the child, so they're going to know what the child's youths and preferences are about decisions. Typically, this is happening in areas such as health or safety. We know that children express preferences from birth, how they like to be held, what their waking and sleeping times are, foods that they like or dislike. And preferences we know are going to change with growth, with time, and with the experience and education and exposure to new things. With the personal outcome measures, it's important to have a reference of considering what is more or less typical for decision making for most children in that same age range. There are some softer sides to that, but what's most typical? Some outcomes, again, will always include an adult being responsible for decision making, most specifically when it comes to health and safety. And the expectations remain that the children and youth are given ample opportunities as they're going through their youth to learn to take minimal risks and to have life experiences on which to make better informed decisions later. Teens, we hope, will be exploring many of these outcomes in ways that lend to joint decisions with their adults and their caregivers. By early adulthood, we expect that the paradigm for teens should be shifting so that the teens feel more comfortable and have more control over decision making while they're still checking in with trusted adults for decision making supports as needed and requested. While teens have legally the same rights as young children, we're expecting them to gain skills in decision making, in learning about new experiences, so that they don't have to end up in adulthood without having had these experiences. Because without providing them the skills in decision making and without teaching them or offering them experience to do so, it sets them up for failure in their earlier adulthood. So things to keep in the back of your mind are, what is choice making looking like for typical children of that same age? Is the child having a typical experience with decision making for their range of their age of years? Are the supports in place for children and teens to make age appropriate decisions and take on greater and greater responsibility as they approach adulthood? Some of the things also that we need to consider are the role of the family. Who serves in that role of the family can really vary. In our personal outcome measures manual for children and youth, it is explained as the child's natural support network, but this can include adults that the children lives with, but may extend beyond that. That may include biological or adoptive family. It may include foster families or legally appointed surrogate decision making. But what's key to this is also to find out what the child's definition of their family is. That's really going to be important as we begin to dig in about who that is and how they play a role in that child's life. The family's involvement will vary, and it's important to consider what is the involvement of each individual family. Are members of the biological or adoptive family the legal decision maker? Is that appropriate for the situation? Are there other surrogate decision makers that are in place? One of the major considerations for CQL is that the child, youth, and their families are achieving their desired outcomes based on their personal preferences. This is an altogether different question than determining whether the social welfare and juvenile justice systems are performing adequately. It's important to note that the presence of court-ordered separation of children from their parents or families does not fully negate the child nor the parents or family's roles in determining the definition of these outcomes. So when we're having conversations with the child and youth, it's important to be really mindful of the multitude of different variations. Things to consider are court interventions, family dynamics, cultural sensitivities, ethnic complexities, and awareness of and responding respectfully when meeting with the child and family. Considering all these things is key. We've also mentioned a little bit about the court interventions, who currently has custody and why, who's the legal decision maker and why, what are the plans that are in place for reunification, if any. It's important to determine the information about the Child Protective Services plan and its goals. The goals can sometimes change depending on various factors that are playing into that system of the service plan. Is it reunification? Is it termination of parental rights? Or are there post-placement goals in place for the child? For basic protections of health, safety, and welfare for children, that can sometimes result in children or youth being placed outside of their home. Sometimes families are unable to be supportive and nurturing, and the child's continued residence with the family results possibly in harm to that child. In other instances, families are very caring yet lack the resources and the capabilities to respond to the child's unique support needs. Families and family courts and juvenile justice systems at times may need to intervene and separate the child youth from their family on a temporary or permanent basis. The child youth may be placed with another family or in residential services. Now, we need to be mindful in situations where there is choice being limited because of court interventions, there's typically a trade-off in terms of outcomes. While the child youth, for example, may not choose where they're living, but their health, safety, and freedom from abuse and neglect are being enhanced because of the outside placement. A family may not be satisfied with services when the child is removed from their home, and neither the child youth nor the family decides where that child is living, but yet other outcomes may be enhanced. Other things that we need to consider are transitions. And transitions, we expect that these happen and we anticipate that these are going to be happening for children and youth and family during those approximate 13 years of childhood. Some things to be thinking about and be planning for are planning for typical school transitions from kindergarten to grade school to middle school to high school to changing new schools. Also, we need to be thinking about as teens are entering into employment eligible years, what does that look like for them? Where would they like to start their first job? What are some of the skills that we need to be planning for? Planning for early adulthood and adult services, which may mean a whole plethora of changing of different of existing childhood services. We also need to be thinking about exploring the supported decision making and other supports around young adulthood. We need to be thinking about if there is court intervention, what does aging out of foster care look like? What does aging out of school or pediatric services look like? Additional changes, because this is in reference to the children and their families, is what are the transitions that families are going through? Are families moving? Are there changes in parental or sibling relationships? Is this child wanting to learn to drive? Are there changes in income and insurances? All of those things will help to inform several of the personal outcome measures, which we're going to later talk to you a little bit more about. But just to provide a little bit of introduction to those, there's several of them, but minimally, certainly these will help to inform outcomes about the family and the youth's continuity and security, about their educational or vocational aims and aspirations, and then some of the services that need to be put in place to help meet children and their families' definitions and preferences on their outcomes.
Thank you so much, Anne. So as I mentioned earlier, it's very important that interviewers are skilled in meeting children where they are. So depending on the child's experiences, they may need different support than what we're going to talk about here. It's very wise to take a look at different resources if you are unfamiliar with different ages and stages. So the CDC has a milestone checker for young children that might give you an idea there. And the American Academy of Pediatrics gives great information about standardized and preventative healthcare for children. All of this can help inform you as you're speaking with families, as you're preparing to speak with children, and as you're making decisions. We are going to talk more about specific age ranges and the considerations for those age ranges during this section, but keep in mind that this is not necessarily where each child will be depending on their needs. In the next few slides, we're going to ask that you guys use the Q&A box, okay, to virtually share your understanding of the developmental milestones you may see in each age range. Keep in mind that these are big age ranges and each child is very unique, so this is not an end all be all, it's just a starting point for everyone. So when we look at some age ranges here, we're going to start with children 8 and younger, specifically those 5 to 8-year-olds. We know a ton changes for those kids that are under 5, sometimes even daily, depending on how young they are, right? So, and we depend really heavily on the grown-ups to help us understand their lives in those age ranges. So we're just really going to focus on 5 to 8 here. So if you could pop your thoughts into the Q&A about some characteristics of 5 to 8-year-olds, that might be developmental, that might be ways they communicate, things like that, fun things to do with those kids. When you're interviewing them, that would be super helpful for us. And I'm going to share some things that we have too. So some of the ideas that we've gotten are that kids in this age range typically have a really strong desire to please adults, right? So that might be family members, that might be other adults that are trusted. That's kind of typical, right? We need to be very mindful of that as we're doing interviews because that can lead to some like people pleasing and telling us things that aren't necessarily what the child thinks or what they think we want to hear. So keep that in mind as you're interviewing kids in this age range. Their attention span is growing exponentially through this period. So, a 5-year-old may not be able to sit through an hour and a half interview, whereas an 8-year-old probably can, depending on their support needs. Thank you so much. Kids can start to understand that others think differently from them at this age range. That's super important to realize. So those 5-year-olds may not quite understand that everyone has different opinions, but as we get closer to 8, that certainly becomes the case. And with that, concrete thinking is evolving into logical thinking. So children begin to apply personal knowledge and experience the situations. Julia says growing independence. Yes, absolutely. We see that there's lots and lots of different transitions that happen in this age, and we're going to talk about those in just a minute. But those all lead to more independence. Learning to read. Yes, we would expect that they're learning to read. So, for those younger kids, you may need to bring the pictorial versions, and for older kids, you may want to bring the outcomes that have the pictures and words. It really depends, right? They start to learn to compare themselves to others. Making choices is really important to kids in this age range, and probably to all kids, if we're being completely honest. They love to show off their talents. Don't think that is bragging. That's just kind of what 5 to 8-year-olds are like. They are developing improved self-control skills. So you may have to be really on your feet with a 5-year-old, but it's going to get better as those kids get older, being able to control themselves and control their impulses. They start to show improved ability to maintain emotional stability as well. Their desires to adhere strictly to rules and to be fair can be really hard sometimes as far as, playing together and working within a family structure and things like that. So that might come up during interviews or be important to note. And children in this age range, as they grow, they start to develop and test values and beliefs that will guide their present and future behaviors. So it's really setting that foundation for, what the rest of their childhood and adulthood is going to look like. And Shelly, we see that your hand is up. If you want to pop something in the Q&A box, you're certainly welcome to do that. It may be under the more dots in the corner of your control panel for Zoom. All right, and so some strategies for success with these young children when you're doing the interviews are what we talked about before, but other things as well. So, these children are very young. They're growing their vocabularies every day. So you may need to reword some concepts such as intimacy, continuity and security and integration because they're still, learning, right? They may not know what all those words are, and you could probably teach them some words. Sitting side by side and doing something together or sitting on the floor is often better than sitting across the table or a desk. So try to make it a really fun conversation rather than an interview. That's going to be intimidating for a 5 to 8-year-old. You may draw family, friends, where they like to go to fun, who they talk to there, what they shop, etc. I like to, I bring a notebook for myself to take notes for kids, but also giving them a notebook so they can take their own notes is really helpful. And, sometimes going back and forth and saying, okay, well, my family lives all over the state like this. What is your family like? And, really learning about that and drawing maps and stuff can be really fun. Consider the location of the interview. What environment is most comfortable for the child is important here. We want to make sure that the right people are present there to support the child, the right, people there that know about the family's desires and hopes and dreams and all of that. And you also want to make sure it's the right place to have the interview and the right time. I don't know about you guys, but if you've had kids, you know that there's some times of day that are better than others, especially for those young kids, right? My kids, I know early mornings are not great, but like morning to noon is great. And then after that, who knows? All bets are off. You want to have the child help you. So they're going to set the ground rules about the interview. They're going to decide if mom and dad can answer questions, things like that. Really make it so they're in control. And you want to have a variety of snacks available, and you'll need to know the dietary needs. Kids this age snack pretty much constantly if they're able to. You want to have a variety of activities, books, paper, markers, games, maybe a computer. It really depends on the family's values there, right? Just lots of options available for the child. You may consider breaking the interview into short sessions. There's no rule that says you have to do it all in an hour and a half. You could do it over the course of a couple of days or a day or something like that in short sessions. You want to consider who's going to be part of the interview, right? So is it mom or dad or a foster parent or something like that? They're supporting them, really making sure you have that figured out before. Consider making an appointment with that family and the child before the actual interview time to review what's going to happen. Then that could be, in a different kind of format than the actual interview, but it might be helpful for that child to get to know you before you're actually asking them all those kind of questions that may be more private for them. At that meeting, you also want to talk about the right place and location and time and who's going to be there. You may also want to explain, what you're going to do with the information ahead of time. Having pictures is really, really helpful. We have a kid-friendly like POM and pictures that we'll share as well. That might be more helpful than the overview guide for children this age. You can use that at the pre-meeting and at the interview. And then taking time to talk to the child alone is super helpful if the family is okay. Depending on the child, that's going to depend and on the family, right? So the child has to be part of the interview in some ways. It's great if you can talk to them alone. If you can't, that's okay too. They really may not be comfortable with that. So kind of gauge that based on each individual family. So the transitions that we see with young children, so those children under 8, is they begin elementary school. They may be aging out of early childhood supports, so depending on the municipality, state, country that you live in. They may transition from preschool IEPs to elementary school IEP services, which may be different depending on, again, the structure of services. School may be their first time being in the care of other adults besides their family, depending on the child. And changes in family situations, like Anne brought up, they may be getting siblings, they may be changing jobs, they may have to move, they may be changing schools. All of these things can happen during that age range and are important to take into account. Every single change and every single transition really affects continuity and security. Another thing I want to mention here is, we talked about computers briefly on the last slide. We know that for children this age, a lot of them have access to tablets and computers and other devices that are connected to the internet. And so really understanding like if there's support there for the child to use those devices safely, what kind of oversight, those kinds of things is going to be really, really important. And that definitely will feed into children are safe. All right. For tweens, so these are those older children's, right? 9 to 12. I actually don't know if anyone uses tweens anymore. So you guys pop some stuff in the Q&A box about this age group. So for this group, we're really looking at they're becoming more independent from their family. They may begin to see the point of view of others much more clearly than they had before. Definitely have an increased attention span here and more ability for complex thoughts. May be better able to express their feelings through talking. So that might be easier for an interview. They develop a stronger sense of right and wrong. So you may see that really plays out, right? That there's a lot more black and white thinking about that. They may show more concern about their body image, their looks and clothes. They may be focused on themselves. And they kind of go back and forth between high expectations and a lack of confidence. So that might be something to navigate during those interviews as well. Friendships are very important to their development. Thank you, Laura. Yes. And LaQuanta said that exploring their options is important as well. Yep, for sure. You may experience more moodiness. They may show more interest in influence by their peer groups. So those friends are important, right? But those friends also can definitely give them some information or some ideas or things like that may matter. Ava says they care more about what others think. Yes, definitely. They're starting to get that self-image and then that also external kind of peer pressure for their image too, for sure. They may express less affection toward their parents, especially towards the end of this age range. And sometimes they might seem rude or short-tempered. And that's, we know that that's part of development, right? And they feel stress more from challenging schoolwork or from challenging social situations or challenging emotions and hormones and all of those things. So there's definitely a lot of things to consider there with how that influences those kids. So some considerations here, when you're setting up the interview, right, you want to ask who's going to be participating. You want to find out what the family expects with the interview process, right? And setting those expectations for them and what the process is going to look like. Really have to be mindful of family schedules here. This interview is going to have to be around extracurriculars for the child and their family, and siblings, all of that, around everyone's jobs and all this. It may be challenging to set it up. You may have to try to make it happen on a weekend or something like that too, if that's easier for families. It just really depends. You're going to expect a wide range of abilities and expressions of independence depending on the child, right? And kind of what their experiences have been at that point. And cultural considerations need to be observed here, right? So be open to learning about the family's kind of cultures, dynamics, all of those things. And expectations and responsibilities may vary widely depending on the family, right? Some families have really strict kind of rules. Other families are more go with the flow. It just really depends. And so walking into the interview with an expectation of not knowing and trying to understand is really going to be important for this age group and all age groups, to be completely honest. So some ideas we have for things you should do is consider the location for maximum comfort and emotional safety for the child. That might be school, that might be home, that might be somewhere different. It just depends. They may have a variety of tangible activities that you might want to have available for the child, like playing games and doing things like that might be really helpful. You want to empower the middle schooler to freely express their thoughts and feelings, and sometimes that means they need privacy to be able to share that with you. Sometimes that means they need to get to know you first. Sometimes it means a lot of things, and so just really kind of gauging that based on the child is going to be really important here. Of course, we want to avoid talking to the child like they're a baby. We don't want to let the family talk over them. So again, it's really important that the child is in control of this interview, right? Even if the family's present, the child gets to decide, who can answer questions and those kinds of things. We don't want to trivialize things that are important to kids, right? So like if it's important, and we're going to treat it with the importance the child assigns to it, okay? And obviously we can't assume anything about anything, right? So just like with adults, we don't know anything about the child until they tell us, okay? Even if someone else told us. I suggest asking the child if they want to speak with you privately and letting mom and dad know that you're going to cover things that may be private, such as safety, abuse, intimacy, those kinds of topics, and that the child may not feel comfortable, really opening up about those things with mom or dad present because, all of the expectations that come with family. So family may or may not be comfortable with that, and that leads into your decision as well. For transitions for this stage for children, we're looking at middle school, more team sports, more groups and clubs. We see puberty happening, and technology and social media are a really big topic here. I saw a statistic that like 80% of children have like unlimited access to the internet or like unparalleled in these ages. And so that's kind of scary. So it's definitely something to talk about there. Yeah, so I'm going to turn it back over to Anne. If you guys want to pop your things in the Q&A box for teens, that'd be fantastic.
That'd be great. Thanks, Kendra. Yeah, if you could help list some of the characteristics that would be applicable more to this teen group age range. Just some of the things that we've come up with is the developmental stages, is that relationships are changing. They're beginning to spend less time with parents, more time with friends. They show more concern about future, school, planning, work. They're probably being asked to and hopefully have more responsibilities at home, at school, and at work. They may still have some conflict with parents. It may be less of a conflict as they're getting a little bit more mature. Some of the major transitions that we've got to be thinking about, of course, are moving from, middle school to high school. Some of the things that are key when you're talking about the age ranges of, high schoolers and what that looks like. That they know it all and adults know nothing. Thank you, Holly. That they've developed their own unique beliefs and they may not fully align with family, which causes an interesting kind of interview strategy. Is that how are we gathering that information respectfully and openly and honestly? Because sometimes there will be things that are at odds with family members. So great call there. Other things to remember would be that, they're going to be gaining their adult rights at age 18 in the United States. They're going to be aging out of school services soon. So lots of things to be talking about here with considerations for characteristics of children. Some of the considerations as you're talking with them and setting these things up for success is just to be aware that youth might be hesitant or wary about this meeting with you. And that's not unusual. All we would ask for you to do is to continue to reinforce that the information that the youth is sharing with you is going to stay safe in that space with you, unless it's health, safety, abuse, neglect related. Remind them that really this is in their hands to continue talking with you and can share what he or she wants and end at any time. Also be completely transparent and make sure that we've got their okay to talk about next steps. But you might be talking to family members and you might be talking with people who are follow-up, who know their services and supports. And there are going to be times where it may not be appropriate or comfortable for the teens to have parents or caregivers in the interview. It's really important for you to develop a rapport and a trusting nature of this. So being open-minded, seeking their input, seeking their direction is really important. Strategies and tools, be prepared for some tough information to come up. Sexual experimentation, self-harm, eating disorders, body image, bullying. These are themes that are being experienced by teens all over. That teens will at sometimes want to provide a little bit of a shock value. Others can be quiet or may seem a bit annoyed or perturbed with the barrage of questions. Again, let them pick the flow of the conversation. Have them be very mindful that there's no judgment. It's a judgment-free zone, and that we're leaving our values and biases behind. We have to be mindful of gender pronouns, of assumptions, of things that we might be assuming regarding sexuality or family makeup. So just don't kind of enter that interview session with the process or with the thought process of you thinking, I'm just leaving all of that at the door, and leave it in open hands for you to gather that from the youth or young adult, and be really excited to talk with them about the focus that they have on their future. What's next? What's coming down the pike? What are what's going to be happening in these next few years? So really fun things can be explored by them, and huge transitions that we need to be mindful of. Leaving high school and joining the workforce or thinking about college, transitioning to adulthood with the adult services and with the being actually legally of age to vote and to have all the rights that are available to adults in the United States at age 18. Again, in different provinces or countries might be 18, 19. Be mindful that formal institutions, schools, human service entities may not be familiar with the support model of something that's called supported decision making. And it's a recognized model of support to promote not restricting or taking away young adults' rights versus some of those older, more traditional methods of guardianship or conservatorship. There is a model of supported decision making. So be mindful of that, bring that up, and have that as a part of your decision and your discussions with teams, with people who are moving into this adult phase. All right, some additional specific considerations that we want to highlight for you with regard to the children and youth outcomes. Kendra, I think we're turning it back over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Anne. And so, as we discussed earlier, for children, youth, and their families, there's 11 outcomes that reference families. Okay, so for that, you need to know the child and the youth and their families' perspective and definition. The other 10 outcomes reference just children and youth. So when the outcome mentions that, you are just really looking for the child's definition. So that's going to be one of the major key considerations for all of the outcomes. Starting with children and youth are safe. Here, we are not only thinking about typical safety, like emergency evacuation, things like that. We are also thinking about how is the child, kept safe with technology, emergencies, fear, sanitation. We need to include education and support for kids to learn how to respond in emergencies and to prevent safety issues. Again, that's going to look different for every child, but you really want to touch on, all of the typical safety stuff, but also technology and money and things like that here as well. And again, this one's just a child outcome. The next outcome is children and youth are free from abuse and neglect. For younger children, I really think it's so important that we talk about discipline style with parents and find out, how are they, supporting their children to learn how to, be a part of society, right? Sometimes that might get into the abuse and neglect kind of side of things. So really be mindful of that. Does the child know how to report abuse? Has anything ever happened? We want to look at body safety education for all ages, and there has to be support in place if anything's ever happened, and support for the child to learn what to do and how to identify and how to prevent these things from happening. And again, this one is just for the child. For children and youth have the best possible health, like the adult one, this is personally defined best possible health. Okay. They may need support from their family depending on their age to define what best possible health looks like and to choose interventions. But it's not the adult's responsibility for defining what health looks like in the child. It's the child's responsibility with the support of the family to really learn about what that could look like. For some children, that might be the absence of illness or problems. It might be restoring lost capacity. It may be stabilizing a chronic condition that they have or prolonging quality of life. It may be minimizing loss of function or things like that, or the child being supported to be aware of their medical issues. As children grow, we expect them to be supported to be more involved in their own health care. Young children obviously need much more support with this, and older teens may need very little support depending on the situation. We need to consider also that older children and teens have rights to have privacy with their doctors without their family present. And often doctors, practice that from a young age with children, giving them a little bit of time to talk to the doctor without family present. To gauge some of the same things that we're gauging the personal outcome measures around safety, intimacy, and those kinds of things. With children and youth and their families experience continuity and security. Note this is a family's outcome. So we're looking at both the child and the family in this area. For this one, transitions are a huge deal here. It's not a lack of transitions, right? We expect there's going to be tons of transitions in children's lives. It's how is the child supported to prepare for, cope with, and deal with the change after it takes place. This outcome can be met in situations where there are frequent changes, right? But that is solely dependent on if that's planned, right? Those are planned changes and the child's involved in that planning phase and the family's involved in that planning phase. Changes are very likely to occur at these ages. And family's financial situation is actually a big part of this as well, right? So does the family have enough money, not only for like the basics of shelter and food and water, and I know this is a hard thing, especially right now, but also for, the child to partake in like the life of childhood, right? Being parts of groups and clubs and other things that make life enjoyable, okay? That financial stress does definitely trickle into children's lives in lots of different ways. So something to definitely take a note of. Sometimes families don't want to talk about it, and that's okay too. We also want to plan for known or anticipated changes: home, health, family size, schooling, and parental relationships. For the children and youth and their families exercise rights, we are looking at both children's rights and families' rights. The United Nations has a Declaration of Human Rights for Children, so you can take a look at that. Families' rights also include things like educational rights and rights to make decisions and have fair education for their children. Rights to make decisions as far as their children are concerned. That's all important here. We're also looking at that transitional piece for those teens to start taking some of those rights and making their own decisions there as they grow and gain those abilities. And also what the planning is for adulthood. So are there guardianship plans? Is there support in place for the child to have supported decision making instead? All of that is really important here. We also want kids to learn about their money and how to manage their money. That is a right as well, especially as they start working or getting close to adulthood. We want to see that happening. And the right to be employed is also an important thing here. In lots of states and territories and things like that, teenagers do get jobs. And so is that something that's being communicated and supported if children want to do that? Okay. For children and youth and their families are treated fairly. Again, this one really piggybanks off the last one. If there are any kind of restrictions on rights and things like that, has it gone through due process, right? Are we looking at, the court system there if the children's are not with their families and those kinds of things? Are there ability and response when families have complaints or concerns about services, including educational services? Do they know their rights about educational services and how to make changes if things aren't right? Those are all very important here. We want to make sure that children know that they're going to have their options fully explained in terms they can understand. They learn skills and behaviors to reduce their reliance on rights limitations if there are any, that they have their personal concerns considered important if that's what they've said, and that they have the option to accept or reject proposed actions, and they have the right to a fair and impartial hearing process if there's any disputes about their rights. And for respect, this is very much just like for adults here. We're looking that children and youth and their families are being treated with respect, right? So we have the expectation that children are going to do a lot. They're being challenged with interesting and capacity growing activities in all areas of their life, that their best image is promoted with the child and their family, and that they have respect from every single person they interact with, for the most part. There may be those one-off situations, but for the most part, people are seeing them as whole people. All right, Anne.
Thanks. And for the next couple ones, I do want to highlight just a few of them that seem to be I mean, they're all very important, but I want to be able to highlight a few of the key issues for children and youth using their environments. This is comparable to the same environments with the peers that are using whatever environments they are. It includes smart devices, technology, being mindful of the potential for safety supports, helping with, household chores, laundry, cleaning, environments, including home, neighborhood, community, city, transportation being available for children and youth. And then for the youth who are getting a little bit older, orienting children to what transportation modes are available to them: public transportation, Lyft, Uber, learning to drive. All of those things are important. With one of the distinctions here for the children and youth application is we're really looking for maximum safe use of their environments. And with knowing how children use their current environments and expanding that allows us to provide the supports needed to ensure as much safety as we can. The other outcome I wanted to point out in this area is children and youth interact with other members of the community. These are opportunities for children to, interact with folks who are outside of other people who are receiving services, outside of staff, outside of teachers. Families would kind of serve as the springboard for children to do this. And we're really looking for children to have life experiences so that they know how to meet up others and how to explore new opportunities and successfully interact with others throughout the continuum of their life. And this occurs at any of the locations where children spend their time: school, work, leisure, sports, faith-based, all of those things. Kendra?
Yeah, so unfortunately, we probably don't have time to get through the rest of the outcomes, but if that is something you guys are interested in learning even more about, you can feel free to, reach out to either Anne or myself. You can ask the question right now. We have about a minute or two left. You can also, send us an email, those kinds of things, or sign up for our webinar that we have, our workshop that we have scheduled later this next year, I should say. So in 2026, in April, we're doing a POM workshop for children and youth. You can register for this on our website, and that's going to pop all of that information in the chat box for you guys and send it out later as well. We'd love to have you join us if you're interested in using the personal outcome measures for children and youth. Sign up for CQL emails. We send resources straight to your inbox. And you can connect with us on the Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Our contact information is here. I also want to give a special shout out to the Facebook e-community. So if you want to join other providers, other organizations that partner with CQL, that Facebook e-community is a great place to do that. You can share lots of information, tips, tools, tricks, all about accreditation, personal outcome measures, all of that good stuff on that Facebook group. And then here's our contact information if you have any questions for Anne or myself about anything with child and youth personal outcome measures. Thank you guys so much, and we really appreciate your time today. It doesn't look like we have any questions. Oh, so okay, I'll let Steph handle that one.
Yes, so we did get a question asking for more opportunities for webinars related specifically to early intervention. Very good suggestion. Definitely something we can look at for next year. Absolutely. Yeah, we're looking to do a lot more POM webinars this upcoming year.
Perfect. Well, thanks everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks for joining us today.